Hey, Mayor More Brothers, back again. And I was listening to Sergeant Willie Pete go in on the white conservatives and the white capitalists and them sucking the money out of the system to where the average Joe can't afford to get anything. This inflation, nobody can afford to buy a house. The jobs are not adequate enough to afford a family, that kind of stuff. General stuff I was trying to tell them in the first place. The attitude of women where they want this upwardly mobile hypergamous tract where everybody's got to earn 100K, even though if everybody earns 100K, then that becomes the average and it still moves up. You got to remember when all this crap first started, the average pay, I used to talk to people in the middle class. The average pay was $2 an hour. That was the average hourly wage, about $2 an hour. So figure that out. The average yearly salary is probably less than about $5,000 a year, and the average house costs $15,000, 3 times your yearly salary, which sounds strange now, but that's what it costs. So it doesn't matter about the figure, that's 100K is a sliding scale. 100K back when this stuff first started in the 70s, 100K was a millionaire, or actually more than a million, multi-millionaire, because you're making 20 times the salary of the average person. 100K now is right around twice the salary of an average person, which puts you supposedly in the upper middle class, supposedly. But be that as it may, I mentioned him, I'm giving him his props because he, even though it was a lot wordy, and how Sarge goes all over the place, he's going to put his upper middle class suburbia ideals in. It doesn't matter what you do about it. Like, everybody's supposed to live in a suburban utopia. And what he's really advocating for was really a good old-fashioned communism, where the state levels off all of the salaries, or the ideas of what they call communism. That's where the state levels all the salaries. And everybody's all equal, which even in the communist country, that was not the case. Even though that was an ideal that was thrown out there, that never really happened in any country that I can think of. There was always hierarchy. There always will be hierarchy, because that's the way human beings are actually built. Nature is built that way, where there's hierarchies. Can't get around that. Anyhow, he hit upon something about men checking out, or the average young person checking out and not doing anything. And this is something that I kept saying. It's not that the average boomer did anything. They didn't. Or the average Gen Xer did anything. They didn't. And he's finally coming to the realization, you can't alpha your way through this. It's impossible to alpha your way through this. This is systemic. This is systemic, because if you try to alpha your way through it, all you're doing is raising the bar. If everybody alphas their way through it, you're going to raise the bar. If you want to work like a Chinese person, which is 996, 9 to 9, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, okay, which is, believe it or not, what they're doing with 996 is anti-socialism. Believe it. 996 goes back to the old industrial capitalist model, which goes back to the old slave plantation, which does work about getting a country off its feet and out of poverty. That's how the United States did. That's how Northern Europe did it. They dominated the world with that kind of 996 mentality. All the Chinese did was adopt the same mentality, the 996 or the industrial capitalist factory model, to work their way back into dominance. But that is not socialism. Anyway, I think I'll do a video on that, man. That'll be interesting. That'll be extremely interesting to actually do something like that. But at least the Chinese take care of their people. So they might be 996, but there are no Chinese homeless people. There are no Chinese that starve to death, on the street. All children are taken care of. So I will give the Chinese that. Their mix of socialism and capitalism does render some kind of benefit. But let me get off track, because where I want to go with this, before I forget my point, is where we are right now with this wave of what we call feminism, or what I call the gynocentric model that is sweeping the world, that women have become adjusted to, that are making men despondent because the pendulum has swung too far to the left, as I call it. Women have way too many privileges and way too many demands. And I've done articles about it, about them doing that. And I've also got another article coming up about it, why white men, we're talking about middle-class white men, are mingling, are single. We're not talking about the lower-class dudes that barely have a high school diploma. We're talking about middle-class, college-educated white men, and why they're not participating. And Sergeant Willie Pete correctly said that the juice is not worth the squeeze, and it's not. It's not worth it anymore. He said it, he spoke it, but as he often does, he diverted away from the point. If the juice is not worth the squeeze, you have incentivized the boys and the young men to participate. You have literally gave them the bricks to build what Soul in Black, who Sergeant Willie Pete can't stand, the bricks to build the wall of silence. And that was SYSBM. That was the passport, bros, as the indicator wall of silence. We're just going to go do it elsewhere. We're not going to even talk to you about it, because it's not worth talking to you about anything. What's worse than a wall of silence? Because the capitalists don't really care whether you talk to the women or not. If you go alpha your way through it and you go pick different women, they don't care. Because a wall of silence, you're still working. You're still participating. You're picking different women, but you're still participating in the society. Because a wall of silence just talks about you dealing, really just talking about you dealing with black women and you going elsewhere. The wall of indifference, which is something I talked about, is worse, because that's Mouse Utopia level wall of indifference, where you don't care anymore. And what Chetty and Reeves and Scott Galloway and all these publications are not talking about the freaking wall of silence. They're talking about the wall of indifference, where young men literally do not care anymore, because the system has taken so much from them and put so much on them that there's no hope. And what you're hearing amongst young men sitting on their hands with all of these feminist demands of their time and their money and their participation, and you need to make $100K just to land you a fat 4. You need to work 996 just to get you a 2-bedroom house in the middle of a shitty neighborhood. You need to go in debt just to have a family, a wife and kids. A wife that still doesn't respect you or even like you because she's settled for you, and she wants to brag with the Porsche and the big body Benz that she's dreamed of, that her teachers have taught her that she should have just because she's a woman, just because she has a vagina. And he was talking about people like Rich Cooper and people like that, saying that you need to work harder, you need to man up. At least one thing Sergeant Willie P said, the math's not mathing, because I showed that. That's why I haven't even heard these guys talking about the man up and you got to make $100K, you got to be this exceptional man, because we're only talking about maybe 5% of the people. Maybe 5% of the people. Some people say 15, which is bullshit. 5%. And if you're black, you're talking about 2. Let's be real here. 85% of single black men make less than $50,000 a year. 85%. Married men make more. But 85% of single black men make less than $50,000 a year. 85% of single black women make less than $50,000 a year. I mean, that was one hell of a graphic that blackdemographics.com put out. Guess what? We in the manosphere, we run to black demographics for all kinds of things, talking about marriage and all that kind of stuff, right? We don't run to black demographics about that, do we? We don't want that to be talked about. And this is systemic. Now, after we talk about the black men and the black man's plight, now we got to talk about the white man's plight. But guess what? White men are checking out. Asian men are checking out. Latino men are checking out. They're checking out. Math doesn't math. That hill is too high. That's how come you see marriage on a sliding scale. The poor people used to be the most married. Why? My mentor, who's damn near 80 years old, she's been counseling women for 40 years, over 40 years. She's got a PhD in it. She's written 20 books. She's written 20 books. I have a partner. One partner's written 50 books, and my mentor, she's written 20 books. So all you Negroes that you think you're expert out there with an opinion that's been doing this on the internet less than 10 years, probably less than 10 years, pulling this stuff out of your ass, you don't know shit, because the two people that I know that do this, they've been doing this for 40 years and they've written multiple books on this very subject, where she says marriage is supposed to be your way out of poverty, not a qualifier for it. Or I should say a disqualifier for it. Poverty is not supposed to be a disqualifier for marriage. Nowhere in the world is poverty a disqualifier for marriage. If you're going to have a society, especially a society that has a nuclear family, you have to distribute the women, you have to distribute the wealth. If you do not, your society will collapse. Your men will leave, the ones that can, because now you're trying to prevent men from leaving, or they will fail to participate. This is all over the world. You see it, it's called the herbivore men, the grass eaters in Japan. It's called lying flat in China. It's called the Great Resignation in the West. That's how come you have this flurry of articles written by white men, upper class white men, and a whole bunch of white women complaining about men not participating. What's wrong with them? They don't want sex no more. We can't throw the carrot out and them come running. What's wrong with them? They're incels. They don't measure up. So it's the women actually refusing to actually deal with them. It's the women refusing to date them. It's the women refusing to have sex with them. The 80-20 rule is not about that. What happens is the 80% is leaving. That's the very thing that it said in the last article that I read. The price is too high. You go out on a date or you have an interaction and start talking to a woman and she throws out this big price tag. You go, whoa, my Xbox or PlayStation, my Pornhub, and my lotion is much, much cheaper and a lot less headaches. Because it's not just the money. Your starting price is too high. Like Sarge says, who can afford a house nowadays? You have Mexico that can build a regular bungalow for a peasant for less than $10,000. They can actually come in with a 3D printer that builds houses. They can build them for $10,000 each. They're not 20, 10. Not out of wood, out of concrete. You know, the shit that's not going to break, they can build it for $10,000 a piece. If they want to. The United States just dumped what? They just dumped what? $5 trillion during COVID? You can't solve a homeless problem? You can't bring down the price of housing? Sure you can. If you want to. They don't. It's not even just the women anymore. It's the whole lifestyle. Why should a man kill himself just for a woman, just for a family, and shorten his life, where he's got to work that 996, where he's got to work, that 72 hours. He's got to work 72 hours a week. Or the Americans are not going to go for that. Now, white men have done that in the past. They're not going to do that. So what you're getting is not the wall of silence. What you're getting is a wall of indifference. They don't care anymore. They're not going to participate. That's how come they can't find employees. Work is too hard. It's not enough to make a living, to make the standard American living, but to live the standard American dream. Your women want too much. The women are the new overseers. What do overseers do? The overseers were the ones that had the whip and measured rewards or punishments out. to make you work harder, to make you produce more. That's what capitalism was built on. And now that the whip doesn't work anymore, men would rather die a lonely death than put up with it. What can you offer them? What can you do to them? It's not about violence. Violence they can handle. Insurrections they can put down. A burning city can be rebuilt. During civil rights, man, during the 60s, man, they had 383 riots. 383 major riots. Just between 1963 and 1972. They had 383 riots. You can rebuild that. You cannot rebuild a society that refuses to try, that decays. Rome fell not because it was conquered. Rome fell not because there were riots. Rome fell because people didn't care anymore. They had no reason to participate in the society anymore. It took a long time because you didn't have the internet. Now it's the whole world. Because if you can't handle the wall of indifference that is plaguing most of you young men, society will collapse. It's already breaking down. Not just people to produce things, but people to buy things. This society is going to collapse. It's built on people doing what they're supposed to do in the system that they're supposed to do it. Most people aren't rural anymore. Most people are urban. In an urban setting, people have to participate. You have to be the cog in the great machine. If you're not, it's going to collapse. There's only so many cogs that can actually stop functioning before the society starts to lose traction and starts to decay. It's already decaying. And the women are not going to plug in that gap. They can't. They could have, they would have. Why do you think Calhoun talked about the Mouse Utopia and it always failed during the D-cycle? Calhoun modeled his Mouse Utopia after the urban city to see if that demographic cycle was valid, especially if you use non-humans. He used mice. It's valid. The demographic cycle is undefeated. You're looking at it right now. And you double down by invoking gynocentric laws that promote women. You thought you were going to get around it. You didn't. Guess what? You made it worse. You're not looking at incels. You're not looking at a failure of men. What you're looking at is a wall of indifference. They don't care anymore. And telling them to man up and go outside and clean up your room, it's not going to work. It's what we've been trying to tell you for the last 2 years. It's not going to work. And all COVID did was let young men know that you're not going to die. They all said the same thing. COVID dramatically changed men. It stopped the hamster wheel long enough for them to get their bearings. Like, why am I doing this? Got a chance to sit at home and actually contemplate, why am I doing this? And once the hamster wheel started back up, they said, I'm not getting back on that because it didn't work. Didn't work the first time. I'm not getting back on that. Now, before my rambling gets too long, I'm trying to make these talks and these rambles short. Marriage and coupling is supposed to be way out of poverty. Marriage and coupling is supposed to be simple, not hard. Let's take the smartphone or the iPhone. What made the iPhone so popular is because it was simple, not hard. What's the difference between PC-DOS, Microsoft PC-DOS, and Windows? Why did people gravitate to Windows? Why did the computer industry explode with Windows? It's because they made the computer simple and not hard. The command line is hard. When I started with PC-DOS, the command line was hard. Everybody couldn't use it. The adoption exploded when you made it simple for most people. The internet was difficult when you had a command line internet. I was on it. On Usenet, the Linux or the Unix command line to get on the internet was hard. Very few people are on it. What happened? They created the World Wide Web with a user interface. They made it simple, point and click. That's why it's adopted. Where a 5-year-old can actually get on it. That's what Steve Jobs found out. How did he come up with the interface to the iPhone? How did he know it was actually viable? When you give it to a 2-year-old, he can use it. Simple. Marriage if you want it to be adopted, it has to be simple. That's how come gender roles where you actually teach little children, boys and girls, how their role. Marriage becomes simple and not hard. That's how come little girls and little boys can get married at 13, 14, 15. Because marriage is simple and not hard. You've made marriage a PhD level. Talk about partners. That's how come the marriage age used to be lower than 20. When it first started, it's like 15, 16 years old, and now it's 30 and moving up. Even 30-year-olds can't do it correctly anymore because you made it too difficult. What did you think was going to happen? That's why you have an increase of out of wedlock births at all levels. Mr. Z just put up a chart. Talk about out of wedlock at all levels. That's why the divorce is so high, especially amongst the lower classes, right? Where it used to be the opposite. Marriage rates are low and divorce is high at lower levels because you've made marriage too difficult. You've made the price too high. Marriage to be adopted by the 85, 90% of people is supposed to be simple. That's why you have the 80-20 rule in marriage. Look at it. Marriage is not supposed to be a carrot. It's not supposed to be a word at the end of the rainbow. It's supposed to be a building block to build a life, to build a society. If you make the bricks too costly, guess what you're not going to get? Nobody's going to build anything. And people are not going to participate in a system where they can't get their needs met. Nobody's going to work 80 hours a week to be homeless. Life in society is supposed to make things easier, not harder. If you want to make it hard, man, you want to live a hard life, go out in the middle of the woods by yourself. That's hard. You bring a couple of buddies along with you, make it easier. Look at your survival TV shows. You got 8, 9 men getting together, working together. It makes life easier. Human beings are built to cooperate. You build this big old society of 330 million people. It's supposed to be easier, not harder. Marriage is supposed to be simple, not hard. Life is supposed to be simple, not hard, especially in a society like this. What you have is the wall of indifference. That's what it looks like. So the Richard Reeves, the Chettys, the whoever's, the psychologists writing these pieces, trying to figure this out. It's the wall of indifference. It's a wall of silence. It's been coming for the last 15 years. Soul and Black called it 15 years ago. That's what you're going to get. And it evolved into something even worse, which is called the wall of indifference, which is what the MGTOWs were talking about 10 years ago, which everybody was afraid of. Now you have it. Anyhow, let me stop rambling before this goes on to be like an hour talk. Ain't nobody about to listen to my old behind for an hour. So with that, I'm going to jump off here. This is BGS out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.